The day that I broke my back was April 9th, 2016. It was a little less than 3 years ago, and it was a nasty day for skiing. It had been completely white out that morning. I couldn't see my hand when I stretched out in front of me. And then the whiteout gave way to rain. My close friend Michael and I had been searching for skiable snow. The rain had finally let up, and we were determined to salvage a half-decent day of skiing. Then I decided to go ski off into the trees alone. I hit a small natural feature, and the wet snow gave way underneath my skis. I launched into the air, not in control. Time seemed to slow down. I landed skiing backwards and off balance, one ski hitting the ground first, then the other. I could see over my right shoulder the tree squarely in my sights. It couldn't have been more than a moment or two, but a dozen thoughts raced through my mind. I'm lined up for that tree. I'm gonna hit it. Should I throw my body out of the way? Try to miss it? I'll just hit the next one, but maybe I won't. I threw my body sideways, hitting the ground, and then, sliding through the snow, I crashed into the tree. In the span of seconds, my world was literally and figuratively turned upside down. The impact broke my spine, 6 ribs, shattered my sternum in half, and collapsed my right lung. What's more, I was hanging upside down in the tree well, which is the hole in the snow around the trunk of a tree. My skis had somehow gotten stuck up above, and I was dangling upside down in an 8-foot tree well. Reaching my hand out above my head, upside down, I still couldn't touch the ground at the bottom of the well. I spent almost an hour upside down in that tree well until I was rescued by ski patrol. They extricated me from the well, got me off the mountain, and rushed me to the hospital for emergency surgery. Because of the damage done to my spinal cord upon impact, I was immediately paralyzed from the chest down, and to this day I'm unable to move or feel from around the top of my stomach down. But the specifics of my accident are not what I want to spend our time today talking about. What I want to share with you is what my journey has looked like since that day. To get into the story of these last 3 years, we should probably start at the beginning, when I woke up in the ICU after surgery. The neurosurgeon had just fused 6 of my spinal vertebrae together using 2 titanium rods and 12 big screws. I woke up in a hospital bed in a room I didn't recognize, and I couldn't sit up, nor was I allowed to, for that matter. My world, I realized in that moment, had shrunk down to the size of that hospital room. I couldn't go for a run, I couldn't go visit Thailand, I couldn't drive a car or even get out of bed. I realized in that moment that if I wanted to expand my world back out, if I wanted the same fullness and adventure back in my life, it was gonna take time and patience, sure, but importantly, it was gonna require me to get out of my comfort zone and just try a lot of new things. Because at that point, nothing felt comfortable. And the limits of what was possible in my life felt like they had crowded in around me. I started a note on my phone that day. It was entitled, "Stuff I'm Still Gonna Do." And the first thing I wrote down on that list was, quote, "Finish another marathon, running or otherwise." You see, running had always been a hugely important part of my life. I ran D1 cross-country track at Princeton and continued to run seriously all throughout my 20s. In fact, I had just run the New York City Marathon a few months before my skiing accident. I didn't know at the time how exactly I'd get it done, but I did know I'd get back to that starting line in New York again. And as it turns out, there's an awesome piece of equipment called a racing wheelchair. And there are equally awesome foundations like the High Fives Foundation, the Christopher Reeve Foundation, which will help you acquire such equipment and also get to into the New York City Marathon for free. And so, a little after a year, after I hit that tree, and after only 3 months of training, I was back at the starting line. of the New York City Marathon, this time in a racing chair. It had taken a lot of awkward and uncomfortable training, a lot of time spent doing something that was new and not very natural, at least initially for me, but the effort had paid off. The days of being unable to sit up in bed seemed a long time ago. And so I think the marathon serves as a good particular example, but this habit of getting out of comfort zone and trying new things became a hugely important aspect of my life, of my day-to-day life. It was hard, but it was also fun and deeply rewarding. And so I tried things. I figured out how to drive, how to push a shopping cart at the grocery store. I experimented with new ways of getting from the floor into my wheelchair. I experimented with home automation and got Alexa handling things like turning on the lights, to locking the doors, to playing my favorite music, and adjusting the temperature. My daily expectation, my attitude waking up, is I bet with some effort and a little experimentation, I can add something new to my life. My question, bless you, to myself in the morning was simply, what new thing should I try to figure out today? I got back into climbing. I rediscovered my love for skiing using a monoski. I'd spent 3 years living in Hawaii and wanted to get back to the ocean, so I found a creative new way to surf again. I golfed, literally for the first time in my life. I was never a big golfer. I went mountain biking. Simply put, I got creative and I TRY'd. I honestly think that's my favorite three-letter word in our dictionary. Try. I loved to travel and adventure before my injury, and I still do. The first pick there is in Ireland, and the wheelie is on a ledge in the Grand Canyon. I spent last January, a year ago, in 2018, adventuring in Colombia with two of my closest buds, one of whom actually sits in the front row here. Hey, Rich. From the beaches of Cartagena up to small coffee farms in the Andes Mountains, getting driven around in a tuk-tuk, TRY. And just recently, I tried a big one. I went to Paris alone for 6 weeks and just lived in the city. J'ai eu l'occasion de pratiquer mon français. I had the opportunity to practice my French. I got to see countless incredible works of art, often from a unique vantage point. You don't know what that is. Mona Lisa. In a chair, you get a nice viewing area. I made a bunch of new friends, and in short, I continued trying new things and figuring stuff out. Sidebar, snails are delicious. I think this idea of pushing into what's possible in life is pretty generalizable. You don't need some obvious physical disability to ask these kinds of questions of yourself. What would bring more depth, more fullness into my life? In what ways can I push the limitations of my own potential? So let's take a sec to think. I'm going to be quiet for a minute, and you, where you sit right now, ask yourself, in your own life, what's one thing, big or small, that you want to do, but that you've avoided? Maybe the thought of trying makes you uncomfortable, maybe you're not sure you can do it, maybe you just haven't taken the time yet. But it's something that would stretch you. Either write it down on your phone or turn to a friend and share it. You got 60 seconds. Go.
Yeah. We're trying to decide if I want to go to Mines or not, so.
Oh, nice. Are you in or are you?
I'll be accepted, so I'm just wondering if I want to try doing it, so that'd be cool.
Versus like just doing something else or?
Yeah, like going somewhere else and just like, yeah. That or just like living a dream like you all. Yeah.
That's so sick.
Those two things that come to mind for me.
Literally, I've been going to Simon Gym for like 3 months and still haven't been fully certified.
What?
Well, I've been like, you can climb alone, autoplay,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, it's more fun.
Yeah, for sure. Where do you find?
I actually live in Nashville,
Oh.
so I'm just in town for a week to ski with this guy. And I've just been like putting it off.
Dude, you got it. I'm on the rock climbing team here.
Oh, you
so,
are?
yeah. So, yeah.
I mean, I've got this for earlier this week. It's on the autoplay system. I'm like, it's
Dude, yeah, you gotta.
so much
Okay, let's bring it back.
Yeah, teach you got it.
So, I challenge you this week. Give it a try if you can. But to bring us back to my journey post-injury, there was one thing that always threatened to trip me up. And that was the problem of relative comparison. We have this innate tendency to compare. I found myself comparing myself to others, to other adaptive athletes, to other able-bodied athletes. I would also compare against my own past, how well I used to ski, what my life used to look like. It may seem odd, but I actually found myself, more often than not so much comparing my abilities to other athletes that could use their legs, but to other paralyzed athletes, usually my friends who could use their abs. It's weird, right? What we focus on. You'd think that I'd be preoccupied mostly with being fully able-bodied again, but I so often caught myself thinking not about that, but about, oh, if only I had some more core strength, I'd be progressing so much faster in long skate. My dance moves would be that much more dialed. I've come to realize that this habit of relative comparison is both incredibly common, it's our default tendency, and that it's basically the most common form of human bondage. You want the fastest way to limit your life, your joy? You want to live smaller? Stay preoccupied with comparison. Think about how others do this, or you used to do that. It's a surefire way to distract yourself from the potential in your life. Actually, I was just having dinner with some friends this weekend, and my friend Alana, who's a clinical psychologist, told me that comparison is the #1 cause that she sees day to day behind anxiety and depression in her patients. It's toxic stuff. But we know this, right? We all know this. The hard part isn't acknowledging that, yes, comparison's not helpful, that it gets in our way. The hard part is what to do about it. How do we compare less? How do we shift our gaze and stop focusing on what we might not be? And although I may not have all the answers, I can share with you what's helped me a lot. And my answer actually brings us back to the ICU days after my injury. My mom had hung a small piece of art on the wall that had a verse of scripture on it from Jeremiah. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. It may seem small, but this one verse, being up in my hospital room, it reinforced a truth in my life from the very earliest days. Even though I didn't plan this, even though it's not what I expected, my story with God is unfolding, and He has big plans. And I've seen God's handiwork at play since the very beginning, in how relationships in my family have been healed, and how through this injury, God's given me an entirely new area of ministry, mentoring and advocating for the recently injured. I've never been so well equipped to serve a population of individuals so in need. And I see His redemptive work in each and all of the unbelievable new relationships that have been poured out into my life. Turns out, He has and will continue to redeem our suffering if we work with Him. He will still tell a beautiful story with our lives if we let Him. Oh, and what's more, we'll get to know him and ourselves a whole lot better along the way. So in those moments of comparison, when grief or anger or frustration would otherwise get their foothold, I remind myself who's in charge, that there is both beauty and purpose in my story ahead. Even if it won't be easy, which it never is, and even if it's not the exact story I would have planned on my own, which of course it never is. And so to wrap up, we've covered some ground today. We've talked about how easy it is to limit ourselves, to shrink down the size of our world and deny ourselves the fullness of what's possible. I encourage you, be the kind of person who explores. Ask, where is the line of possibility in my life? And get uncomfortable and experiment. See if you can't push that line of possibility out a bit further. And always remember, especially when you find yourself getting stuck in that all too common trap of comparison, who's in charge? You've got the universe's best storyteller sewing life and purpose into your story. Focus on discovering what he has in store for you, and forget all the comparison crap. So, thanks for letting me come and hang out. I think we do have a bit of time. If you have questions for me, I'm a pretty open book, so don't be shy. Whether it's adaptive athletics or specifics of my narrative or more about how I got to know this guy.
Justin's a little like me in that, yeah, really no questions off limits.
Yeah.
And if it is, we'll just tell you you're not going to answer it. But that should mean you don't ask. Mr. Harris, Mr. Sutherland, run out some microphones. We don't do this often, but if you have a question for Justin for his story, his faith journey, anything like that, as always, right? Think about your question before you ask it. Articulate it well. We like eloquence here, and so think about what you want to ask and how you want to ask it. But if you have a question, raise your hand, and Mr. Sutherland or Mr. Harris will come to you. Mock down here.
Yeah.
How were you so able to stay faithful through all of the pain and stuff?
It's a question I get a lot. So, I've touched on a lot of really positive and beautiful stuff that's been woven into the story in the last 3 years. It's not to say there's not been grief, and I do think that grieving is a process and a very important thing to give space for. I'd say, to directly answer your question, probably the biggest part was I let people in. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment here in Denver after I did my rehab at Craig Hospital, and I had a close buddy like Rich, or a brother, sister, family member, cousin in that second bedroom every other week for the first 8-9 months. And we spent a lot of time talking it out, crying, punching pillows, and otherwise working through some of the loss, because the loss was real. Thanks for the question. It's a good question.
How did you and Mr. Butler meet?
Sammy boy.
None of you are allowed to call me that.
We initially met in church at Wellspring, and I discovered this church through some close family friends out here. Probably the more exciting question, which I can't go into all the details of, is the adventures we've had since. We've got a close group of guy friends that gets together every month or so. And yeah, it's become a very dear, close buddy of mine. You guys are lucky to have him. I see another hand that's been up for a while too.
My question is very similar to the first one. I mean, I appreciate your incredibly wholesome attitude right now. It's commendable. But you've had to have gone through some dark times when this happened. What got you through that tough time to allow you to come to this point in your life?
Yeah.
Because we're all gonna face it sooner or later. I wanna know what you did.
Yeah. It's a very good question. And the answer is going to be very related to the first question. For me, the two biggest things are the relationships in my life and my faith. And it was very much the combination of those two things that was vital. Yeah, I remember coming home from, does anyone, folks know Craig Hospital up here in Englewood? Yeah, unbelievable place to get a chance to visit, not as a patient, but visit. I used to call it Camp Craig. We did like fly fishing trips, archery trips. I flew a prop plane out of Centennial Airport. Like, I'm a little off topic, I'm getting there. Coming back from this archery trip on the bus, I remember looking out the window up at these little goat paths up in the hills and the foothills of the Front Range, and it was a couple weeks out from injury, and that's when I first remember the poignancy of the loss of running, like, hitting me in the face. And I, like, wept in the bus. And I talk a lot about the importance of acknowledging and giving space for the fullness of loss. I think a mistake we make is to, like, kind of do that and try not to address. And yeah, it's this art, not a science, of giving space for it and feeling it and letting it sink in what's happened. But there's this line, and it's gray, but acknowledging loss, feeling it, not turning your head away from it is one thing, but then there's this human tendency I think we have to kind of spiral into grief and let it suck us in. And it's not like I literally put a stopwatch and time box to my grief, but it was like you give it space, and then usually through close friendship, find a way to turn from it and look, again, like what we talked about today, like what is the story ahead? What are the new creative ways that I can live into the circumstance and still see like the beauty of God's story in my life? And so, acknowledging the goat paths up that hill in the Front Range is not something I could take even my racing chair up. That sucks. But then getting out onto the trails, pushing the New York City Marathon 30 minutes faster than I was able to run it, and actually to the point of goat pass, figuring out that there's an e-assisted mountain bike and getting back up in Boulder to the same goat pass. So that was a meandering explanation. I know we prize eloquence, Sam, but sometimes I don't know. Great question.
How are you able to see the plan God has been creating for you through this?
Awesome question. Pieces of it. I think I used to, again, getting back to like relative comparison, I used to have friends in high school that were like, yep, I got my 10 years planned, I know I want to be a doctor and all this, and I was always like, ugh. I was like, you're going to go to DVC, you're going to community college, you're like, don't have your stuff together, and it'll all work out. I've seen from the very earliest days post-injury that there is purpose in this. I referenced, like, my family got together in the ICU and prayed together, and my dad led us in prayer, and that doesn't happen very often. I saw, like, God's hand in it, but it was not this, like, high-fidelity, detailed map of the next 10. And I'm still kind of figuring it out. I know sharing my story is going to be a piece of it. I was on the phone on Tuesday with a lead software engineer at Google Maps about their accessibility data. I work in software. Like, there's going to be really cool opportunities, but I think a big part of it is trust, right? I think that's kind of the point of life, is learning to trust.
How has your injury brought you closer to Christ?
Great question. Yeah, it's kind of forced the issue, right? On this idea of trusting, because when everything's going nicely and athletics are clicking along and there's a good gig and I had a good job and I was in a wonderful relationship and all these things, like it's hard to need that reliance. And when the bottom drops out, it was a big test of my faith, and I think, yeah, it brings a depth when you really have to rely on Him.
Where's your favorite place to ski?
Good question. And a timely question. In like 3 hours, we're driving up to Winter Park for the annual guys trip. So Winter Park's got a great adaptive program. If any of you have been out there and seen it, but they get like on a Saturday 40 adaptive athletes, blind athletes, paralyzed athletes, folks that have various disabilities out skiing oftentimes for the first time. So they're a bunch. Mike Runners. Thanks for all these questions, by the way, everybody. This is cool.
When did you realize that you needed to hand your life over to God?
It was well before my injury. My faith kind of stretched back pre-injury. I first encountered the Lord in high school. I looked in the mirror and committed my life as a man of God over to Him in a new way when I was living in Hawaii. And there's a lot of story behind that, but yeah.
Before I'm gonna cut us off, big time. But also I have a microphone, so I get to ask a question too.
Sam's gonna try and stump me.
No. You talk a lot about trust, and we talked a lot about trust and friendship and just needing people for certain things, physically and relationally and all that kind of stuff. But to reverse it, how has in the last 3 years, how have you changed as a friend?
Yeah. There's this thing that I talked about from time to time, this idea that like, you get hurt, you think about, okay, there's this big loss, people that can't walk, and then they kind of like, half smiling, half sadly say like, oh, but at least get a good parking spot. And there's like really big trajectory setting, beautiful stuff that's come with this injury. That just blows the parking placard out of the water. And like, I've talked about the superpower of connection that has been just flooded into my life. I think this chair is visible, you just see it right away, and that's like pretty intimate, vulnerable stuff in terms of my story. And so, I don't know if you've noticed this, but usually when you share honestly of yourself, it elicits the same in kind from who you're with. And so I'm getting, you see how I kind of get to questions, it's a meandering thing, eloquence. Both with my closest friendships, as well as with my Uber driver or the person I meet out on a Friday night at the bar, it precipitates this like depth of connection and like kind of piercing through the superficial into substance very quickly. And it's prompted me, sometimes whether I want to or not, but I'm pretty Sam's an open book, so I usually want to, like kind of to go there and to get into matters of substance with people. I remember I went back to work fairly quickly, and I was working for a firm in New York City at the time, and my first trip back after injury a couple months out, this gal that I knew pretty well, we weren't super close, but she approached me in the cafe and was like, hey, Justin, like your injury, I've tracked your story, I just wanted to share. And then she proceeded to share things about her battle with cancer that I had no idea about. It just like it went there. And so it's just provided this depth and honesty in my relationships, which has, I think, been a direct result in part of this injury. But also, like, there's a nugget of kind of lesson to derive from that, right? Like, if you're open and honest with your stuff, you'll establish a connection and go there with people a lot faster.
Awesome. Told you it's cool. I'm gonna pray for us. If you have other questions, I would love Justin to come back and speak again, just about life and that kind of stuff. So if you would echo that, then let me know, and we can bring him back by popular demand. And thank you, Justin, for doing that. Would you guys let me pray for us real quick? God, thank you so much for these people. I thank you for Justin and his story that he got to share with us. I pray that we would leave this place and we would think about it. Or we would think about our own stories, where we need to be vulnerable, what stories we need to share. Or I pray that we would think about trust and letting people in. That we have a renewed understanding of what true friendship is, of what trust and faith is. Lord, I pray that you would give us courage to try. Courage to go out and do things that you've created us with the ability to do, to push the limits of what humanity is capable of for good, to explore and to travel, to seek adventure. God, I truly believe that all those things are part of who you are. Give us the courage to do that. And give us the courage to bring people along with us as we do those things. To spur on our friends to try. Lord, I pray for the rest of this day, Lord, that you would walk with each of these students through their relationships, through their struggles. Lord, I pray that you would strip comparison away from their minds and allow them to live fully in you. Remind them that they are loved, that we love them, that we care about them, and we want to hear their stories. I thank you for this place. Most of all, I thank you for your love for Christ, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Hey, before you guys go, give just one more round of applause. Before you guys go,